Dr. Sarah Chen had always believed that compassion was humanity's greatest strength, even when it led to their greatest mistakes. Standing in the observation deck of the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, she watched the alien world spin slowly below, its purple oceans catching the light of twin suns. The planet had been humanity's first major discovery in their expansion beyond Earth's solar system, and Sarah had spent 3 years studying its remarkable ecosystem. The Kythera were magnificent creatures. Standing nearly 8 feet tall on their hind legs, they resembled a cross between wolves and dragons, with sleek metallic fur that shifted colors with their emotions and intelligence that rivaled humanity's greatest minds. Their society was ancient, structured, and completely incomprehensible to human researchers. For 2 years, the scientific teams had observed from orbit, following strict non-interference protocols established by the Galactic Council. Sarah pressed her palm against the cool metal of the observation window. Below, she could see the sprawling cities of the Kythera, their crystalline structures reaching toward the sky like frozen lightning. The beings moved through their world with grace and purpose, unaware that their planet had become the subject of intense study by 3 different species: humans, the insectoid Zephyrians, and the aquatic Meridians. "Dr. Chen, you need to see this." The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, her research partner and the closest thing she had to family out here among the stars. His usually calm demeanor carried an edge of urgency that made Sarah's stomach clench. She turned away from the window and followed Marcus through the sterile corridors of the research station. Their footsteps echoed in the artificial gravity, a constant reminder that they were suspended in the void between worlds. The station housed 43 researchers from Earth, all dedicated to understanding the Kythera without making contact. Marcus led her to the monitoring bay, where dozens of screens displayed feeds from hidden observation drones scattered across the planet's surface. The images showed Kythera settlements, migration patterns, hunting parties, and daily life. Sarah had watched these feeds for thousands of hours, learning to read the subtle body language and social cues of the alien species. "Look at screen 7, Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. Sarah's eyes found the designated screen, and her heart immediately sank. The drone had captured a scene in one of the smaller Kythera settlements. A group of adult Kythera stood in a circle, their metallic fur displaying the deep red patterns that indicated extreme anger or distress. In the center of the circle lay a small figure, barely visible from the drone's altitude. "Zoom in," Sarah whispered. The image expanded, revealing a young Kythera cub, its fur a dull gray that spoke of severe illness or injury. Even from the orbital perspective, Sarah could see the labored rise and fall of its chest. The adult Kythera around it displayed complex patterns of color, but Sarah had studied their emotional expressions long enough to recognize the signs of a heated argument. "They're deciding whether to abandon it," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. She had observed this behavior before in Kythera packs. When a member became too weak to keep up during migration season, the group would make a collective decision about whether to stay and risk the survival of the whole pack or leave the individual behind. Marcus nodded grimly. "The migration starts tomorrow. If they leave it, the cub won't survive 3 days alone." Sarah watched as the adult Kythera began to disperse, their color patterns shifting to the muted blues and grays that indicated resigned acceptance. One adult, slightly larger than the others and displaying patches of golden fur that marked it as the pack leader, remained near the cub for several long moments. Even across the vast distance, Sarah could sense the anguish in its posture. "We can't interfere," Marcus said quietly, reading the expression on her face. "You know the protocols. Non-interference is absolute. The Galactic Council made that very clear when they granted us observation rights." Sarah knew he was right. The Galactic Council, a governing body comprising 12 advanced species, had established strict rules about contact with developing civilizations. Interference could result in humanity losing their exploration privileges, being confined to their own solar system for centuries, or worse. The consequences weren't just political, they were existential. Humanity was still the newest member of the galactic community, barely tolerated by species that had been traveling between stars for millennia. But, as she watched the Kythera cub struggle to lift its head, Sarah felt something deeper than protocol considerations. She thought of her sister's daughter, Gemma, who had died in a hospital bed on Earth while Sarah pursued her career among the stars. She remembered the helpless rage she had felt, watching a child suffer while adults made impossible decisions about resources and care. "There has to be something we can do," she said, her hands clenching into fists. Marcus stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, I know what you're thinking. But this isn't Earth. These aren't humans. We don't have the right to impose our values on their society." "Their values?" Sarah turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "You've been watching these feeds as long as I have. The Kithara show compassion to their injured. They share resources with the weak. They mourn their dead. This isn't about different values, Marcus. This is about survival mathematics, and that cub is losing the equation." On the screen, the last adult Kithara had walked away, leaving the cub alone in the center of the settlement. The small figure attempted to stand, managed to get halfway up, and collapsed back to the ground. Its fur had shifted to a pale yellow that Sarah recognized as the color of fear. "Even if we wanted to help," Marcus said, "what could we do? We can't land a shuttle without being detected. We can't communicate with them. We can't even be sure our medical technology would work on their physiology." Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing through possibilities. The research station maintained a small fleet of stealth shuttles for emergency evacuations and covert sample collection. The shuttles could reach the planet's surface undetected, but landing near a Kithara settlement would be incredibly risky. If they were discovered, it wouldn't just end their careers, it could trigger an interstellar incident. "The cub is small," she said slowly. "Maybe 30 pounds. A single-person shuttle could land in the forest outside the settlement after dark, retrieve the cub, and return to orbit before dawn." "Retrieve it and, then, what?" Marcus demanded. "Keep it as a pet? Try to heal it with human medicine? Hope that it doesn't die from the shock of being taken from its home?" Sarah didn't have good answers to his questions, but she couldn't shake the image of the abandoned cub. She had dedicated her life to studying alien life forms, driven by a belief that understanding other species would make humanity better. But what was the point of understanding if it never led to action? "I need to think," she said finally. Marcus watched her with concern. "Sarah, promise me you won't do anything reckless. Promise me you'll think about the consequences, not just for you, but for all of humanity." She nodded, but didn't make the promise he wanted to hear. As Marcus returned to his duties, Sarah remained in the monitoring bay, watching the small figure on screen 7. The cub had managed to crawl to the edge of a structure that provided some shelter, but it was clearly weakening. Its breathing had become more labored, and its attempts to move were increasingly feeble. Hours passed. Sarah watched as the planet's twin sun set, casting the settlement into the strange twilight that marked Kithara nightfall. The other research staff went about their routines, analyzing data, conducting experiments, maintaining the station's systems. Life continued normally for everyone except Sarah, who found herself unable to look away from the dying cub. Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, the station commander, found her there near midnight. Reyes was a stern woman in her 50s, a career researcher who had worked her way up through the ranks of the Terran Exploration Service. She ruled the station with efficiency and absolute adherence to protocols. "Dr. Chen," she said, settling into the chair beside Sarah. "Marcus tells me you're having concerns about our observation subjects." Sarah didn't trust herself to speak immediately. On the screen, the cub had stopped moving entirely, though she could still detect the faint motion of its breathing. "Commander," Sarah said finally, "how many species has humanity encountered since we joined the Galactic Council?" 47, not counting the Kithara, Reyes replied. "Why do you ask? How many of those species would have let that cub die?" Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, Sarah. Different species have different survival strategies. The Kithara have thrived for millions of years with their current social structures. The Zephyrians would have saved it," Sarah said. "I've read their cultural reports. Their hive structure means they never abandon their young. The Meridians would have saved it too, their pod family system ensures every individual receives care until natural death. And the Zarathi would have eaten it to gain its strength," Reyes countered. The Voidborn would have considered its suffering irrelevant to cosmic order. You can't judge an entire species by human standards. Sarah finally turned to look at her commander. What if I'm not judging them? What if I'm judging us? Reyes's expression softened slightly. Sarah, you're one of the most talented xenobiologists I've ever worked with. Your insights into Kythera social structures have advanced our understanding by decades. But talent doesn't give you the right to risk everything we've built out here. What have we built? Sarah asked. We sit in orbit and watch. We take notes and write reports. We understand everything and change nothing. What's the point of knowledge that never leads to action? The point, Reyes said firmly, is that we're guests in this galaxy. Humanity has been spacefaring for less than a century. Some of the species on the Galactic Council have been traveling between stars for longer than our species has existed. We follow their rules because the alternative is isolation, and isolation means the end of human expansion into the universe. Sarah knew this. Every human who worked beyond Earth's solar system knew the precarious nature of their position in galactic society. Humanity had been granted membership in the Galactic Council only after demonstrating both technological capability and cultural restraint. One major violation of Council protocols could undo decades of diplomatic progress. But knowing the political realities didn't make it easier to watch the cub die. Commander, Sarah said quietly, what made you want to study alien life? Reyes considered the question. Curiosity, initially. The desire to understand how life could evolve so differently under different conditions. But also hope, I suppose. Hope for what? Hope that by understanding other species, we might understand something fundamental about life itself. About consciousness. About the possibility of meaningful communication across the vast differences that separate us. Sarah nodded. I became a xenobiologist because I believed that knowledge could bridge any gap. That understanding could overcome any barrier. But understanding without the ability to act feels like torture. On the screen, the cub had not moved for over an hour. Sarah, Reyes said gently, I'm going to order you to return to your quarters and get some rest. That's not a request. Sarah stood, her legs stiff from hours of sitting. Yes, Commander. And, Sarah? The shuttle bay is monitored at all times. Security protocols require approval codes from both myself and Dr. Martinez for any launch. Please remember that. Sarah met her commander's eyes. I understand completely. She walked through the quiet corridors to her small quarters, past the sleeping rooms of her colleagues, past the laboratories where automated systems continued their work through the station's artificial night. Her room was sparse, a bed, a desk, a wall screen showing the view outside. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at the planet below. Every human beyond Earth's solar system lived with the knowledge that they were pioneers in the most literal sense. They were exploring not just new worlds, but new relationships with species so alien that successful communication sometimes seemed impossible. The work was vital for humanity's future, but it came with crushing responsibilities and impossible moral dilemmas. Sarah had always prided herself on following protocols. She had never violated a regulation, never questioned orders, never put personal feelings ahead of mission objectives. But, as she sat in her quarters, she found herself thinking about Emma, her sister's daughter who had died while Sarah pursued her career among the stars. Emma had been 7 years old, bright and curious, full of questions about the universe and Sarah's work studying alien life. When the cancer was discovered, Sarah had been deep in research on the Meridian homeworld, investigating their healing techniques. She had requested emergency leave to return to Earth, but the transport schedule and the delicate nature of her work meant she didn't arrive until 2 days after Emma's death. Her sister had forgiven her, of course. The work was important, the opportunities rare, the future of humanity dependent on researchers like Sarah. But forgiveness didn't ease the guilt, and understanding didn't diminish the loss. Now, watching another young life slip away while she sat powerless in orbit, Sarah felt the same crushing weight of inaction. She understood the protocols, accepted the necessity of non-interference, recognized the political realities that governed human expansion into the galaxy. But understanding didn't make it bearable. She stood and walked to her wall screen, switching it to display the feed from screen 7 in the monitoring bay. The cub had not moved. Its breathing was barely detectable, even with the drone's enhanced sensors. Sarah calculated travel times in her head. A stealth shuttle could reach the planet's surface in 43 minutes. The settlement would be dark for another 6 hours. She could land in the forest, locate the cub, and return to orbit before the Kithera woke. The shuttle's medical bay included basic life support systems that might be adaptable to alien physiology. It was possible. Difficult, dangerous, and strictly forbidden, but possible. Sarah returned to her desk and activated her personal workstation. If she was going to do this, she needed to gather every piece of information available about Kithera physiology, the settlement's layout, and the stealth shuttle's capabilities. She told herself she was just exploring possibilities, conducting theoretical research, preparing for a scenario that would probably never occur. But even as she tried to rationalize her actions, Sarah knew she was past the point of theoretical planning. The cub was dying, and she had the knowledge and tools to save it. The only question was whether she had the courage to act despite the consequences. As she worked through the night, gathering data and refining her plan, Sarah never looked away from the screen showing the small, still figure in the alien settlement below. She had lost everything once before by choosing duty over compassion. This time, she would choose differently, regardless of the cost. The stealth shuttle Whisper had been designed for exactly this type of mission, though not for this purpose. Sarah's hands moved across the control panel with practiced efficiency, her 3 years of mandatory pilot training finally proving useful for something other than emergency evacuations. The shuttle's systems hummed quietly as it descended through Kepler 442b's atmosphere, its hull adapting to match the surrounding environment. Getting to the shuttle bay had been surprisingly easy. Sarah had waited until the deep night shift change, when most of the station's crew was either sleeping or focused on automated monitoring systems. She had downloaded the necessary authorization codes from Dr. Martinez's workstation during a moment when he had stepped away, using her administrative access to the research databases. The security cameras would show her movements, but by the time anyone reviewed the footage, she would either be back with the cub or dead in the alien forest below. The planet's surface rushed up to meet her as she piloted the shuttle through the final approach. The landing site she had chosen was 3 kilometers from the Kithera settlement, in a dense section of forest that the orbital surveys had identified as uninhabited. The trees were massive by Earth standards, their silver bark gleaming in the light of the twin moons, their broad leaves filtering the pale light into intricate patterns on the forest floor. Sarah set the shuttle down in a small clearing, its landing systems automatically adjusting to the uneven ground. The Whisper was built for stealth operations, its hull incorporating technology borrowed from the Zephyrians that could render it nearly invisible to most forms of detection. As long as she completed her mission before dawn, the Kithera would never know she had been there. She spent several minutes in the shuttle's airlock, running final checks on her environmental suit. The atmosphere of Kepler 442b was breathable for humans, but she couldn't risk exposing herself to unknown pathogens or allergens. The suit was lightweight and flexible, designed for researchers who needed mobility while maintaining environmental protection. The alien forest greeted her with sounds unlike anything on Earth. The night was full of chirping, clicking, and melodic calls from creatures she had only observed through orbital sensors. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, making her movements feel bouncy and uncertain. The air smelled of ozone and something floral that reminded her of jasmine. Sarah activated the suit's navigation system and began making her way toward the Kithera settlement. She moved carefully through the underbrush, her headlamp's beam revealing plants with leaves that folded away from the light and flowers that glowed with their own bioluminescence. Every few steps, she paused to listen for signs of large predators. The orbital surveys had identified several dangerous species in the area, including pack hunters that were roughly equivalent to Earth's wolves but significantly more intelligent. The 3-kilometer journey took her nearly an hour. As she approached the edge of the settlement, Sarah crouched behind a cluster of broadleafed plants and studied the Kithera buildings through her suit's enhanced vision systems. The structures were even more beautiful up close, their crystalline walls seeming to grow from the ground itself rather than being constructed. Gentle light emanated from within some of the buildings, but the settlement appeared quiet and peaceful. According to her observations from orbit, the cub was located near the central area of the settlement, beside a structure that appeared to serve as some kind of community gathering place. Sarah activated the shuttle's remote sensors, linking her suit systems to the orbiting drone network. Screen 7 showed the same heartbreaking image she had been watching for hours, the small figure lying motionless in the open area. Moving through an alien settlement at night was terrifying in ways Sarah hadn't fully anticipated. Every shadow could conceal a guard or patrol. Every sound might indicate discovery. The Kythera had excellent hearing and night vision, and, while they appeared to be sleeping, Sarah had no way of knowing their sleep patterns or security arrangements. She moved from building to building, staying close to the crystalline walls and avoiding open spaces. The architecture was unlike anything humans had ever built, following organic curves and impossible angles that seemed to defy conventional engineering. Some structures appeared to be partially grown rather than constructed, their walls showing the same cellular patterns as living tissue. As she drew closer to the central area, Sarah began to hear something that made her freeze in place, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from multiple sources around the settlement. It took her several moments to realize she was hearing the breathing of sleeping Kythera. The sound was unlike human sleep breathing, deeper and more resonant, with occasional harmonics that suggested some form of communal respiratory pattern. The cub lay exactly where the orbital feeds had shown it, in a cleared area between several of the larger structures. Up close, Sarah could see that it was even smaller than she had estimated from orbit, probably weighing no more than 25 pounds. Its fur was a dull gray-brown, lacking the metallic sheen that marked healthy Kythera. Its breathing was labored and shallow. Sarah approached slowly, her suit's sensors analyzing the cub's condition. The readings were alarming: elevated body temperature, irregular heartbeat, dehydration, and multiple cellular indicators of severe systemic stress. Without immediate intervention, the cub would likely die within hours. But, as Sarah knelt beside the small figure, she encountered her first major problem. The cub was conscious, its large eyes reflecting the starlight as it watched her approach. When she reached toward it, the cub made a sound unlike anything in her xenobiology training, a complex tonal pattern that seemed to carry both fear and resignation. Sarah froze. She had assumed the cub would be unconscious or too weak to react. Instead, she found herself in direct contact with an intelligent alien being, violating every protocol about first contact with underdeveloped species. The cub was looking at her with obvious intelligence, its expression conveying emotion she could almost understand despite the vast differences in their evolution. "I'm here to help," she whispered, knowing the words were meaningless to the cub but needing to say something. "I'm not going to hurt you." The cub tilted its head in a gesture that seemed almost quizzical. Its eyes were larger than human eyes, adapted for the dim light of a world with distant suns, and they seemed to hold depths of understanding that made Sarah question everything she thought she knew about intelligence and consciousness. She activated her suit's medical scanner, running it over the cub's body to gather more detailed information about its condition. The results confirmed her worst fears: the cub was suffering from what appeared to be a combination of malnutrition, infection, and organ failure. It was dying, and it knew it was dying. Sarah had brought a portable medical kit designed for human emergencies, but she had also loaded it with broad-spectrum antibiotics and cellular regeneration compounds that might be adaptable to alien physiology. The risk was enormous: what helped humans might kill the cub instantly. But doing nothing would certainly result in death. As she prepared the first injection, the cub made another sound, this one softer and somehow more trusting. It seemed to understand that she was trying to help, despite the impossibility of meaningful communication between their species. Sarah felt tears form in her eyes as she realized that this moment represented everything she had dreamed about and everything she feared about contact between humans and alien intelligence. The injection was a modified antibiotic compound that her research suggested might be compatible with Kythera biochemistry. She administered it carefully, monitoring the cub's vital signs through her scanner. For several terrifying minutes, nothing happened. Then, the cub's breathing became slightly easier, and its body temperature began to stabilize. Sarah prepared a second injection, this one containing cellular regeneration compounds and nutritional supplements. The cub watched her with those impossibly deep eyes, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost conversational. Despite the language barrier, Sarah felt a connection forming between them, a recognition of shared consciousness across the vast gulf of evolutionary difference. The second injection had more dramatic effects. Within minutes, the cub's vital signs began to improve measurably. Its breathing became stronger, its heartbeat more regular. It even managed to lift its head and look around the settlement with what appeared to be curiosity rather than resignation. But, as Sarah celebrated the success of her medical intervention, she heard something that made her blood freeze, voices approaching from one of the nearby buildings. The sounds were unmistakably Kithara, their complex tonal language carrying across the quiet settlement. Someone was awake and moving in their direction. Sarah had planned for this possibility, but facing it was different from theoretical preparation. She had two choices: flee immediately and leave the cub to face discovery alone, or attempt to hide while maintaining her position near the patient. Either option carried enormous risks. The voices grew closer, and Sarah could hear multiple sets of footsteps on the crystalline pathways between buildings. She made a decision that surprised her. Instead of fleeing, she activated her suit's camouflage system and crouched beside the cub, hoping that the Kithara would assume the small figure was still dying and leave it alone. 3 adult Kithara emerged from a nearby building, their fur displaying complex patterns of color that Sarah's training helped her interpret as concern and confusion. They approached the area where the cub lay, speaking in low tones that carried harmonics unlike any human language. As they drew closer, Sarah could see them clearly for the first time without the filter of orbital observation. They were magnificent beings, even more beautiful and impressive than the long-distance sensors had suggested. Their movements combined grace and power in ways that reminded Sarah of both wolves and dancers. Their metallic fur shifted colors constantly, creating patterns that seemed to convey meaning as complex as human facial expressions. Their eyes held the same depth of intelligence she had seen in the cub, but magnified by adult experience and wisdom. The largest of the 3 Kithara, whose fur displayed golden patches that marked leadership status, knelt beside the cub and made a sound of obvious surprise. The cub's improved condition was impossible to miss. Where hours earlier it had been dying, it now showed clear signs of recovery. The adult's fur shifted through rapid patterns of color that Sarah interpreted as confusion, hope, and something that might have been joy. The other 2 Kithara joined their leader, all 3 examining the cub with obvious care and concern. They spoke in rapid tones, their language incomprehensible but their emotions clearly readable. They were trying to understand how the cub had improved so dramatically without any intervention from the pack. Sarah remained motionless, her camouflage system rendering her nearly invisible against the crystalline structures. But, as she watched the reunion between the cub and its pack members, she realized that her mission was far from over. The cub was stable but not healed. It would need additional medical care to fully recover. And she had no way of providing that care without revealing her presence to the Kithara. The adult Kithara spent several minutes examining the cub, their behavior suggesting both relief and bewilderment. The cub, meanwhile, seemed increasingly alert and responsive. It managed to stand on unsteady legs, prompting sounds of encouragement from the adults. But, as it attempted to walk, the young Kithara stumbled and would have fallen if not for the quick intervention of the pack leader. Sarah watched this interaction with growing concern. The cub's improvement was real but incomplete. Without continued medical intervention, it might relapse within hours. But, providing that intervention would require her to reveal herself to the Kithara, violating every protocol about contact with developing species and potentially triggering an interstellar incident. As she wrestled with this dilemma, Sarah noticed something that made her reconsider everything she thought she knew about the Kithara. The pack leader was examining the injection site where she had administered the first antibiotic dose. Its behavior suggested not just curiosity but recognition. It seemed to understand that the cub had received some form of medical treatment. The 3 adults began looking around the settlement with obvious purpose, their movements suggesting a search pattern. Their fur had shifted to colors that Sarah recognized as alertness and suspicion. They knew someone had been there, and they were looking for evidence of the mysterious benefactor who had saved their cub. Sarah faced an impossible choice. She could flee now while her camouflage still provided protection, leaving the cub to recover or relapse without her intervention. Or she could reveal herself to the Kithera, accepting the consequences of first contact in order to provide the continued care the cub needed. As she debated her options, the pack leader did something extraordinary. It looked directly at her position and made a sound that seemed almost like a question. Despite her camouflage, despite her alien nature, despite the impossibility of meaningful communication, the Kithera somehow knew she was there. For several long moments, Sarah and the pack leader stared at each other across the vast gulf of evolutionary difference. The other two adults had noticed their leader's behavior and joined the vigil, all three Kithera watching the space where Sarah crouched hidden. The cub, meanwhile, made soft sounds that seemed directed at her position, as if it too knew she was there and was trying to communicate. Sarah realized that this moment would define not just her own future, but potentially the future of human-Kithera relations. She could maintain her hiding place and hope the Kithera would eventually lose interest, or she could take the greatest risk of her life and reveal herself to an alien intelligence. The decision was made easier by the cub's condition. As she watched through her scanner, its vital signs began to fluctuate again, suggesting that the initial treatment was wearing off. Without additional intervention, the young Kithera might relapse into the critical state she had found it in. Sarah deactivated her camouflage system. The effect on the three adult Kithera was immediate and dramatic. Their fur shifted through rapid cycles of color that Sarah's training couldn't fully interpret, but the emotional content was unmistakable: shock, fear, curiosity, and something that might have been wonder. They had probably never seen a human before, and her sudden appearance must have challenged every assumption they held about their world. But, instead of fleeing or attacking, the Kithera did something that would forever change Sarah's understanding of intelligence and compassion. The pack leader stepped forward and made a sound that, despite its alien origin, seemed unmistakably like a greeting. The sound the Kithera pack leader made was unlike anything Sarah had heard in 3 years of orbital observation. It began as a low, melodic tone that seemed to emerge from deep within its chest, then rose and fell in patterns that reminded her of whale songs mixed with human lullabies. The other two adults joined in, creating a harmony that resonated through the crystalline structures around them. Sarah stood slowly, her hands raised in what she hoped would be interpreted as a peaceful gesture. The three Kithera watched her with intense curiosity, their fur cycling through colors she had never observed before. The pack leader's golden patches seemed to pulse with their own light, and its eyes reflected an intelligence that was both alien and unmistakably familiar. The cub, despite its weakened condition, struggled to its feet and took a few unsteady steps toward Sarah. Its movement prompted immediate concern from the adults, who surrounded the young one with protective postures while keeping their attention focused on the strange visitor who had somehow saved their pack member. Sarah activated her suit's translation system, though she knew it would be useless for meaningful communication. The system had been designed to work with known languages from species already catalogued by the Galactic Council. The Kithera language was completely unknown, its tonal complexities beyond anything the translation software could interpret. But communication, Sarah realized, might not require words. She knelt down slowly and opened her medical kit, displaying the instruments and supplies she had used to treat the cub. The pack leader approached cautiously, its movements graceful despite obvious wariness. As it drew closer, Sarah could see details that orbital observation had never revealed: the incredible complexity of its fur patterns, the subtle bioluminescence that highlighted certain markings, the way its eyes seemed to analyze and categorize everything they observed. The pack leader stopped just beyond arm's reach and made a series of sounds that seemed directed at the medical kit. Its tone was questioning, almost conversational, as if it was asking for an explanation of the strange devices. Sarah responded by pointing to the cub, then to one of the injection devices, trying to communicate through gestures what words could never convey. Understanding seemed to dawn in the pack leader's expression. Its first shifted to patterns that Sarah interpreted as recognition and gratitude. It made a sound that was clearly directed at the other two adults, who responded with their own complex tonal patterns. Whatever they were discussing, the emotional content seemed positive. The cub, meanwhile, had made its way to Sarah's side and was examining her with obvious fascination. It reached out with one small paw and gently touched her environmental suit, making soft sounds that seemed almost like questions. The young Kithara showed no fear, only curiosity about this strange being who had somehow appeared to help in its darkest hour. Sarah's scanner continued to monitor the cub's vital signs, and she was concerned to see some fluctuation in its cellular activity. The initial treatments had stabilized its condition, but full recovery would require additional intervention. She prepared another injection, this one containing more aggressive healing compounds that carried higher risks but offered the potential for more complete healing. As she reached for the injection device, the pack leader made a sharp sound that caused Sarah to freeze. The adult Kithara's fur had shifted to colors that clearly indicated concern or warning. It seemed to understand that Sarah was preparing to administer additional treatment, but something about the situation was troubling it. After a moment of consideration, the pack leader did something extraordinary. It reached out and gently took the injection device from Sarah's hands, examining it with careful attention. Its movements were deliberate and intelligent, clearly demonstrating the sophisticated reasoning abilities that had made the Kithara such fascinating subjects for study. Sarah watched in amazement as the pack leader examined the device, occasionally making sounds that seemed directed at her. She began to realize that the Kithara was asking for information about the treatment, trying to understand not just what she was doing but why and how. The level of scientific curiosity was remarkable, suggesting a depth of intellect that orbital observation had only hinted at. Trying to explain human medical technology to an alien intelligence without a shared language was the most challenging communication problem Sarah had ever faced. She began with simple gestures, pointing to different parts of the injection device and, then, to corresponding areas on the cub's body. She used her scanner to display the cub's vital signs, hoping that the visual representations might convey useful information. The pack leader watched these demonstrations with intense focus, occasionally making sounds that seemed like requests for clarification. The other two adults had moved closer, clearly interested in the exchange despite their obvious wariness about this unprecedented situation. The cub remained at Sarah's side, its condition slowly improving but still requiring careful monitoring. What happened next challenged every assumption Sarah held about intelligence, technology, and communication across species barriers. The pack leader began to make sounds that corresponded to specific actions Sarah was taking. When she pointed to the injection site, the Kithara made one particular tone. When she indicated the cub's heart rate on the scanner, it made a different tone. Slowly, impossibly, they were developing a rudimentary shared vocabulary. The process took nearly an hour, but, by the end of it, Sarah and the pack leader had established basic communication about the medical situation. The Kithara had demonstrated understanding of concepts like infection, healing, risk, and benefit. More importantly, it had given what Sarah interpreted as consent for continued treatment. The second injection was more complex than the first, involving multiple compounds that needed to be administered in sequence. Sarah worked carefully, monitoring the cub's response to each stage of the treatment while explaining her actions through the primitive communication system she and the pack leader had developed. The cub's improvement was dramatic and immediate. Its breathing became strong and regular, its color began to return to the metallic sheen that marked healthy Kithara, and its movements showed increasing strength and coordination. Within minutes, it was standing steadily and taking tentative steps around the group. The emotional response of the adult Kithara was overwhelming. Their fur displayed colors that Sarah recognized as joy, relief, and something that seemed like celebration. They made sounds that were clearly expressions of happiness, their voices creating harmonies that echoed through the settlement. The pack leader approached Sarah and made a sound that needed no translation: gratitude. But, even as Sarah celebrated the success of her intervention, she was acutely aware of the magnitude of what had just occurred. She had made direct contact with an alien species, violated every protocol established by the Galactic Council, and potentially altered the course of human-Kithara relations forever. The consequences would be severe, both for herself and for humanity's standing in the galactic community. The pack leader seemed to sense her distress. Its fur shifted to colors that Sarah interpreted as concern, and it made soft sounds that seemed almost comforting. The gesture of empathy across such vast evolutionary differences was profound, suggesting that compassion might be a universal trait among intelligent species. As dawn approached, Sarah knew she had to return to the shuttle. Her unauthorized absence would soon be discovered, and every minute she remained on the planet's surface increased the risk of broader detection. But leaving felt like abandoning not just the cub, but the extraordinary relationship that had begun to develop between species. The pack leader seemed to understand her dilemma. It made a series of sounds while gesturing toward the forest where Sarah had hidden her shuttle. Despite the impossibility of the situation, it seemed to know that she came from somewhere else and would need to return there. Sarah gathered her medical equipment, but, as she prepared to leave, the cub approached her one final time. The young Kithara made a soft sound and gently touched her hand with its paw. The gesture was simple but profound, a recognition of the bond that had formed between them despite their vast differences. The pack leader accompanied Sarah to the edge of the settlement, moving quietly through the pre-dawn darkness. As they walked, it made occasional sounds that seemed conversational, as if it was trying to learn more about this strange visitor who had saved one of its pack members. Sarah responded as best she could, using their improvised communication system to convey basic information about herself and her intentions. At the settlement's edge, the pack leader stopped and made a sound that Sarah interpreted as farewell. Its fur displayed colors that seemed to indicate respect and friendship, emotions that needed no translation. Sarah responded with a gesture of respect, then activated her suit's camouflage system and disappeared into the forest. The journey back to the shuttle felt different from her approach hours earlier. The alien forest no longer seemed threatening but welcoming, as if her successful interaction with the Kithara had somehow changed her relationship with the entire planet. The sounds of nocturnal creatures seemed less alien, more like the natural background chorus of a living world. She reached the whisper just as the first light of dawn began to filter through the forest canopy. The shuttle's systems had remained in standby mode, ready for immediate departure. Sarah completed her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, but her mind remained focused on the extraordinary events of the night. As the shuttle lifted off from the planet's surface, Sarah took one last look at the Kithara settlement through her sensors. The 3 adult Kithara were still visible in the central area, along with the cub that was now moving with obvious health and vitality. The sight filled her with a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. She had saved a life, established communication with an alien intelligence, and experienced the kind of first contact that xenobiologists dreamed about. But she had also violated every protocol that governed human behavior in the galaxy, and the consequences would be severe. The flight back to the research station took 43 minutes, exactly as she had calculated. As the station grew larger in her viewport, Sarah could see the lights of the monitoring bay where her colleagues would soon discover her unauthorized absence. She had perhaps an hour before the deep night shift ended and her violation of protocols became impossible to hide. Sarah docked the Whisper in its designated bay and made her way through the station's corridors toward her quarters. She moved quietly, hoping to avoid early rising colleagues who might question her presence in the shuttle bay areas. But, as she turned the final corner toward her room, she found Commander Reyes waiting for her. "Dr. Chen," Reyes said quietly, "we need to talk." Sarah's heart sank, but she wasn't surprised. The station's security systems would have recorded her movements, and her unauthorized shuttle flight couldn't remain secret for long. She had known this moment would come, she had simply hoped for a few more hours to prepare for it. "Yes, Commander," she said. Reyes gestured toward the conference room. "After you." The conference room was small and sterile, designed for private conversations between senior staff. Reyes closed the door and activated the privacy screens before turning to face Sarah. Her expression was unreadable, professional, but Sarah could sense the anger and disappointment beneath the surface. "Would you like to explain where you've been for the past 6 hours?" Reyes asked. Sarah considered her options. She could lie, claim she had been unable to sleep and had taken a walk through the station. She could claim equipment malfunction or personal emergency. But, looking at her commander's face, Sarah realized that deception would only make the situation worse. "I went to the planet," she said simply. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "The cub?" "Yes." "Is it alive?" "Yes." "It's going to recover completely." Reyes sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. Sarah, do you understand what you've done? Do you comprehend the magnitude of the protocols you've violated? Sarah sat across from her commander. I understand that I've violated non-interference protocols. I understand that I've risked my career and, possibly humanity's relationship with the Galactic Council. I understand that there will be severe consequences. Then, why? Reyes asked. Why risk everything for one alien child? Sarah thought about the question for a long moment. Because I'm human, she said finally. Because compassion is what makes us human. Because understanding without the ability to act is just elaborate voyeurism. Sarah, you've potentially triggered the most significant interspecies incident since humanity joined the Galactic Council. When the Council learns about this, they could restrict human exploration for centuries. They could confine us to our own solar system indefinitely. I know, Sarah said quietly. But, that cub is alive because of what I did. And, I met them, Commander. I communicated with them. They're not just subjects for observation, they're intelligent beings capable of gratitude, curiosity, and compassion. They understood what I was trying to do, and they helped me do it. Reyes stared at her. You made contact? Direct contact? Yes. Limited communication, but real contact. They're remarkable, Commander. Their intelligence is profound, their emotional range is extensive, and they demonstrated scientific curiosity that rivals our own. This is worse than I thought, Reyes said, standing and beginning to pace. First contact with an uncontacted species, unauthorized medical intervention, violation of the shuttle bay, violation of planetary quarantine protocols. Sarah, I have to report this to Earth Command immediately. You're going to face a tribunal that could result in life imprisonment. Sarah nodded. She had known this was possible from the moment she decided to act. I understand, Commander. But, I need you to know that I don't regret it. That cub would have died without intervention. Its pack had already made the decision to abandon it. I couldn't watch another child die while I had the power to help. Reyes stopped pacing and looked at her subordinate with something that might have been sympathy. Sarah, I understand your motivations. As a human being, I admire your compassion. But, as a commander responsible for humanity's presence in this galaxy, I have to consider the broader consequences of your actions. I know, Sarah said. And, I'm prepared to accept full responsibility for everything I did. But, even as she said the words, Sarah found herself thinking not about consequences but about the moment when the pack leader had made that sound of gratitude, when the cub had touched her hand with its paw, when 3 alien beings had welcomed a stranger who had saved one of their own. Whatever happened to her now, she had experienced something that would forever change her understanding of what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of other intelligent species. The consequences would be severe, the tribunal would be harsh, and her career was almost certainly over. But, in the quiet of the conference room, facing her commander's disappointed expression, Sarah Chen felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt proud of her choice. The tribunal convened 6 weeks later aboard the Galactic Council station orbiting Earth's moon. Sarah had spent those weeks in detention aboard the research station, watching through her small porthole as Kepler 442b continued its ancient rotation while her life fell apart in real time. The charges against her were severe violation of non-interference protocols, unauthorized contact with a developing species, misuse of research equipment, and reckless endangerment of interspecies relations. The tribunal chamber was an imposing space designed to accommodate representatives from 12 different species. The architecture incorporated elements from each member civilization, creating a visual testament to the diversity and complexity of galactic society. Sarah sat at a small table in the center of the chamber, flanked by her legal representatives, while the judges observed from elevated platforms that suited their various physiologies. Admiral Harrison of Earth Command served as the human representative, his weathered face showing the strain of defending humanity's newest and most controversial member. The other tribunal members included a Zephyrian hive queen whose compound eyes reflected the chamber's lights like jewels, a meridian pod leader whose aquatic breathing apparatus filled the air with soft bubbling sounds, and 9 other entities whose forms reminded Sarah of the vast diversity of intelligent life in the galaxy. The proceedings had lasted 3 days. Witness after witness had testified about the importance of non-interference protocols, the delicate balance of galactic politics, and the potential consequences of Sarah's actions. Commander Reyes had testified with obvious reluctance, forced to detail every violation while clearly struggling with her own feelings about the situation. Now it was Sarah's turn to speak in her own defense. She stood slowly, aware that every word she said would be analyzed by 12 different species with 12 different concepts of justice, morality, and appropriate behavior. Her legal team had advised her to express remorse, claim temporary insanity, or argue that her actions had been driven by human psychological defects that required treatment rather than punishment. Instead, Sarah chose honesty. "Honored judges," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems, "I stand before you today not to deny my actions, but to explain why they were necessary and right." Admiral Harrison's face went pale. Her lead counsel looked like he might faint. The various tribunal members shifted in their positions, clearly not expecting an outright admission of guilt. "6 weeks ago, I watched a child die," Sarah continued. "Not a human child, but a child nonetheless. A young being with intelligence, curiosity, and the capacity for both joy and suffering. Its own people had made the difficult decision to abandon it, not out of cruelty but out of the harsh mathematics of survival that govern all life in the universe." The Zephyrian hive queen made a sound that the translation system rendered as a question mark. Sarah had studied enough xenobiology to know that hive species often struggle to understand individual versus collective decision-making processes. "I had the knowledge and tools to save that child," Sarah said. "I had studied Kythera physiology for 3 years. I had medical supplies that could treat its condition. I had a shuttle capable of reaching the planet's surface. The only thing preventing me from acting was a set of rules designed to prevent interference between species." Sarah paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled judges. Some appeared to be listening with interest, others seemed to have already decided her fate. "I understand the importance of those rules," she continued. "I understand that premature contact between species can be disruptive, dangerous, even catastrophic. I understand that humanity's place in this galactic community depends on our ability to follow the protocols established by more experienced civilizations." The Meridian Pod Leader's translator emitted soft harmonics that suggested consideration or contemplation. Sarah had learned that Meridians processed information more slowly than most species but often reached deeper insights as a result. "But I also understand that rules without wisdom become tyranny, and wisdom without compassion becomes mere calculation. The non-interference protocols assume that observation without action is neutral, but neutrality in the face of preventable suffering is itself a choice. By choosing not to act, I would have been choosing to let a child die when I could have saved it." Sarah's voice grew stronger as she spoke, her 3 years of studying alien psychology helping her read the subtle reactions of her judges. "More importantly, my interaction with the Kythera revealed something that calls into question our basic assumptions about non-interference. The adult Kythera didn't react to my presence with fear or hostility. They demonstrated curiosity, intelligence, and gratitude. We established basic communication within hours. They understood what I was trying to do and gave their consent for me to continue." Admiral Harrison was making subtle gestures for her to stop talking, but Sarah ignored him. She had already lost everything, she might as well lose it honestly. The Kythera are not a primitive species that needs protection from advanced technology. They are our equals in every meaningful sense, capable of making their own decisions about contact with other species. By treating them as subjects for observation rather than potential partners for dialogue, we were not protecting them, we were infantilizing them. The chamber erupted in discussion as judges conferred with their advisors through private channels. Sarah could see translators working frantically to convey concepts that might not exist in all languages. The idea that non-interference protocols might themselves be a form of interference was apparently controversial. After several minutes, the eldest judge, a being whose species Sarah didn't recognize but who appeared to be made of crystalline structures similar to living gemstones, called for order. Dr. Chen, the translator rendered its voice as ancient and complex. You claim that your violation of established protocols was justified by the consent of the contacted species. But consent requires understanding, and understanding requires communication. How can you be certain that these beings understood the implications of contact with an advanced species? Sarah had been expecting this question. Your Honor, the Kithara demonstrated understanding of medical concepts, technology, and cause and effect relationships. They showed scientific curiosity about my equipment and methods. They made informed decisions about allowing me to continue treatment. If they lacked the capacity for meaningful consent, then they also lacked the intelligence that makes them worthy of protection in the first place. The logic was risky, but Sarah believed it was sound. Either the Kithara were intelligent enough to make decisions about contact, or they weren't intelligent enough to warrant the protections of the non-interference protocols. The Zephyrian Hive Queen spoke through its translator. The human makes a point that deserves consideration. Our own species was contacted by the Meridians during our early technological development. If the Meridians had followed strict non-interference protocols, we might never have achieved spaceflight. Sometimes contact accelerates development in beneficial ways. The Meridian pod leader responded with harmonic patterns that suggested agreement. The Hive Queen speaks truth. Our own evolution was shaped by contact with the crystalline communion. Not all contact is harmful. The question is whether this particular contact was beneficial or destructive. Sarah felt a flicker of hope. The judges were actually considering her arguments rather than simply calculating her punishment. Your Honors, she said, I would like to present evidence of the beneficial nature of my contact with the Kithara. Admiral Harrison looked like he wanted to sink through the floor, but Sarah pressed on. Since my contact with the Kithara pack, our orbital observations have detected significant changes in their behavior patterns. The settlement where I made contact has begun displaying new technologies, including what appears to be primitive radio communication devices. More importantly, they've begun making geometric patterns in cleared areas that seem designed to be visible from orbit. The chamber fell silent. Sarah could see judges exchanging glances and consulting with advisors. You believe they're trying to communicate with you, the crystalline judge said. I believe they're trying to communicate with us, Sarah corrected. The patterns match mathematical concepts that could serve as a universal language between species. They're showing us that they want contact, that they're ready for contact, and that they have the intellectual capacity for meaningful dialogue. Sarah pulled up the orbital images she had been permitted to review during her detention. The patterns were clear and unmistakable: geometric shapes, mathematical progressions, and symbols that seemed designed to demonstrate intelligence and invite response. The Kithara are not a primitive species that needs our protection, Sarah said firmly. They are our equals, and they deserve the right to make their own choices about contact with other civilizations. By denying them that right in the name of protection, we are not serving their interests, we are serving our own fear. The tribunal members conferred for nearly an hour while Sarah waited in increasingly uncomfortable silence. When they finally reconvened, the crystalline judge spoke for the group. Dr. Chen, your actions violated clearly established protocols and potentially endangered the stability of galactic civilization. However, your arguments about the nature of intelligence and consent have merit. The evidence you've presented suggests that your contact may have been beneficial rather than harmful. Sarah held her breath. Therefore, this tribunal has reached an unusual decision. You will be stripped of your research credentials and barred from serving aboard any council-sponsored research vessel. However, you will be appointed as humanity's first official contact specialist with the Kithara species, tasked with establishing formal diplomatic relations. Sarah stared at the judges in shock. She had expected imprisonment, exile, or worse. Instead, they were offering her the opportunity to continue the work she had begun. Furthermore, the judge continued, the council will establish a new protocol for potential first contact situations. When a species demonstrates clear signs of advanced intelligence and technology, contact may be initiated under carefully controlled circumstances. This protocol will be known as the Chun Doctrine, in recognition of your role in identifying the need for such flexibility. Admiral Harrison was smiling for the first time in weeks. Sarah's legal team looked like they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Around the chamber, judges were displaying signs of approval through their various species' behavioral patterns. But the most extraordinary part was yet to come. Dr. Chen, the Zephyrian Hive Queen, said, "There is one more matter. During your detention, we intercepted a transmission from Kepler 442b. The Kithara have been broadcasting a message on multiple frequencies, apparently intended for you personally." Sarah's heart raced. A message? The Hive Queen activated a holographic display that showed complex tonal patterns and visual symbols. "Our linguists have been working to decode it, but we believe the message can be summarized as follows: Thank you for saving our child. When will you come back to visit?" Tears formed in Sarah's eyes as she realized what this meant. Not only had her contact with the Kithara been beneficial, but they were actively seeking to continue the relationship. The bridge between species that she had started to build was growing stronger. "When do I start?" she asked. The crystalline judge's laughter sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Immediately, Dr. Chen. Your ship is waiting." As Sarah left the tribunal chamber, flanked by her legal team and Admiral Harrison, she felt a mixture of relief, excitement, and profound responsibility. She had lost her research career but gained something far more important: the opportunity to help forge the first formal diplomatic relationship between humanity and an alien species. The Chun Doctrine would change how the Galactic Council approached potential first contact situations. No longer would intelligent species be automatically quarantined from contact; instead, they would be evaluated for their readiness and desire for interspecies communication. But, for Sarah, the most important outcome was simpler. She was going home to Kepler 442b, to the cub she had saved and the pack that had welcomed her. She was going to finish the conversation she had started in the alien forest, and help build a bridge between worlds that might change the galaxy forever. As her ship prepared for departure, Sarah looked out at the stars and thought about the courage it took for any species to reach out to another. The Kithara had shown that courage when they welcomed a strange visitor who had saved one of their children. Humanity had shown that courage when they ventured beyond Earth to explore the galaxy. Now, together, they would show the galaxy what was possible when species chose understanding over fear, compassion over protocol, and hope over isolation. The unexpected had happened. What began as one woman's desperate attempt to save a dying child had become the foundation for a new era of interspecies cooperation. And it was only the beginning. 5 years later, Sarah stood in the same forest clearing where she had first landed the stealth shuttle Whisper, but everything had changed. Where once a single hidden landing craft had rested among alien trees, now a permanent research and diplomatic facility stretched across several hectares, its bio-integrated architecture designed jointly by human engineers and Kithara builders. The structures seemed to grow from the landscape itself, their crystalline walls echoing the Kithara aesthetic while incorporating human technology in seamless harmony. The cub she had saved, now grown into a magnificent adult named Thyros in the human approximation of Kithara naming conventions, served as one of the primary liaisons between the two species. His metallic fur had developed the golden patches that marked leadership status among his people, and his intelligence had proven even more remarkable than Sarah had initially assessed. Thyros had mastered written human language within 2 years and had helped develop the translation protocols that now allowed for complex communication between species. "Sarah friend," Thyros said, using the Kithara phrase that had become his standard greeting for her. His voice carried harmonics that the translation system rendered as warmth and affection. "The Council of Pax has reached a decision about the stellar mapping project." Sarah turned from the observation deck where she had been reviewing the latest cultural exchange reports. The Kithara had proven to be natural astronomers, their understanding of stellar mechanics rivaling humanity's despite their pre-industrial technology. The collaboration between human spacefaring capabilities and Kithara theoretical knowledge had already revolutionized both species' understanding of local stellar phenomena. What did they decide? Sarah asked, though she thought she could guess from Thyros's posture. His fur displayed patterns that indicated excitement mixed with nervous anticipation. They have approved the joint expedition to the binary system, Thyros replied, his colors shifting to brighter hues that indicated joy. 3 Kythera astronomers will accompany the human survey team to study the gravitational interactions between the twin stars. Sarah felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with human achievement. The Kythera had developed their astronomical theories without ever leaving their planet's surface. To see them preparing to travel between stars represented an incredible leap in their civilization's development. But, more importantly, it represented the kind of collaborative progress that neither species could have achieved alone. Thyros, that's extraordinary news, Sarah said. Who did the council select for the expedition? Pack leader Vareth, star watcher Linnea, and myself, Thyros replied, his colors displaying what Sarah had learned to recognize as humble pride. The council believes that having the Saved Cub participate in the first off-world expedition will demonstrate the strength of the human Kythera alliance. The phrase Saved Cub had become Thyros's informal title among his people, a reminder of the event that had initiated contact between their species. Rather than feeling shame about his early weakness, Thyros wore the designation with honor, understanding that his survival had opened pathways between worlds. Sarah's personal communicator chimed with an incoming priority message from Earth Command. As she reviewed the transmission, her expression shifted from pleasure to concern. Thyros noticed immediately, his fur displaying the muted blues that indicated worry. Difficult news from your home pack, he asked. Sarah had learned that Kythera psychology was remarkably sophisticated when it came to reading emotional states, even across species barriers. Thyros could interpret human facial expressions and body language with uncanny accuracy, a skill that made him invaluable as a diplomatic liaison. Not difficult, exactly, Sarah said carefully. But significant. The Galactic Council has received a formal petition from the Andromedans requesting recognition as a developing species worthy of contact consideration. Thyros's fur shifted through rapid patterns as he processed this information. The Andromedans were a species from a neighboring galaxy whose signals had been detected by Council monitoring stations. Their mathematics suggested advanced intelligence, but their technology appeared to be centuries behind the galactic standard. The Council wants to apply the Chen Doctrine, Sarah continued. They're asking me to lead the evaluation mission. The Chen Doctrine had been refined significantly since its initial establishment. What had begun as Sarah's desperate justification for saving Thyros had evolved into a comprehensive framework for assessing the readiness of developing species for interstellar contact. The doctrine emphasized communication, consent, and gradual introduction rather than strict non-interference. Thyros was quiet for several minutes, his colors cycling through patterns that Sarah recognized as deep contemplation. Finally, he spoke, "You created the doctrine because of our people. It is proper that you should implement it for others. But it means leaving Kepler 442b just when our collaboration is reaching its most productive phase," Sarah said. The stellar mapping project, the cultural exchange programs, the joint research into consciousness studies, all of that will continue without me. Sarah friend, Thyros said gently, you taught my people that helping one individual can transform relationships between entire species. Perhaps helping the Andromedans will create new possibilities that we cannot yet imagine. His wisdom struck Sarah as both profound and characteristic of the Kythera approach to long-term thinking. Over 5 years of collaboration, she had learned that the Kythera naturally considered the implications of actions across much longer timescales than humans typically managed. There's something else, Sarah said. The Council wants Kythera participation in the evaluation mission. They believe that having multiple species involved in first contact situations provides better assessment and reduces the risk of cultural misunderstanding. Thyros's fur immediately brightened to patterns that indicated intense interest. They want Kythera to help evaluate the Andromedans? They want you, specifically, Sarah said. The Council recognizes that your experience as both the subject and facilitator of first contact gives you unique qualifications for this kind of work. The implications of this request were staggering. 5 years ago, the Kythera had been an isolated species unaware of galactic civilization. Now, one of their number was being invited to participate in shaping how that civilization approached other developing species. It represented not just advancement for the Kythera, but recognition of their equal status in the galactic community.
When would we depart?
Thyros asked, his colors displaying the complex patterns that indicated excited acceptance of a challenging opportunity.
6 months, Sarah replied.
The journey to the Andromedan system will take 2 years each way, with approximately 1 year for evaluation and potential contact.
It's a 5-year commitment minimum.
Thyros was quiet again, considering the magnitude of the undertaking.
Sarah understood his contemplation. She was wrestling with similar thoughts.
The mission represented an incredible opportunity to expand the principles they had developed into galactic policy. But it also meant leaving behind the world and relationships that had defined both of their lives for the past 5 years.
Sarah friend, Thyros said finally, may I share something with you that I have never spoken aloud?
Of course. When I was dying in the settlement that night, I was not afraid of death.
Kithara understand that death is part of the natural cycle.
But I was sad because I believed I would never understand the lights in the sky that had always fascinated me. I thought I would die without ever knowing what lay beyond our world. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she listened to her friend's quiet confession.
You saved my life, yes, Thyros continued.
But, more than that, you gave me the opportunity to understand those lights. In 5 years, I have learned about stars and planets, about the vast diversity of life in the galaxy, about the possibility of consciousness existing in forms my people never imagined.
You gave me knowledge of infinity.
His colors had shifted to patterns that Sarah had only seen once before, during their first meeting in the alien settlement. They conveyed gratitude so profound that it transcended the normal emotional range of either species. Now you offer me the chance to help another species discover that same infinity, Thyros said.
How could I refuse such an opportunity?
How could we refuse? Sarah realized that her friend was right. The Chen doctrine had been born from her conviction that compassion was humanity's greatest strength, that understanding without action was meaningless. Now they had the opportunity to extend that compassion to another species, to help the Andromedans avoid the isolation that had limited the Kithara for millions of years.
There will be risks, Sarah warned. The Andromedans might not be ready for contact. They might react with fear or hostility. The mission could fail completely. All meaningful actions involve risk, Thyros replied.
But the greatest risk is choosing safety over growth, isolation over connection.
My people learned this from humanity's example.
Over the following months, Sarah and Thyros prepared for their departure while continuing their work on Kepler 442b. The joint research projects they had initiated would continue under new leadership, but the personal relationships they had built would endure regardless of distance. The night before their departure, the Kithara settlement held a ceremony that had no equivalent in human culture. The entire pack gathered in the central area where Sarah had first encountered Thyros as a dying cub. They created complex harmonic patterns with their voices while their fur displayed colors that painted the darkness with living light. The ceremony was part farewell, part blessing, and part celebration of the bonds that had formed between species. Marcus Webb, who had become the chief human researcher on Kepler 442b after Sarah's transition to diplomatic work, stood beside her during the ceremony.
Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had followed protocols that night? He asked quietly.
Sarah considered the question as she watched the light patterns dance across the assembled Kithara.
Sometimes, she admitted. But I think about it less as time passes.
The choice I made wasn't really about breaking rules, it was about choosing to act when action was needed. The galaxy is a different place because of that choice, Marcus observed.
Humanity's reputation in the galactic community has changed completely.
We're no longer seen as cautious newcomers, we're recognized as innovators who can bridge gaps between species. The ceremony concluded with Thyros approaching Sarah and placing a small crystalline pendant around her neck.
The pendant had been grown using Kithara biotechnology, its structure encoding the harmonic patterns that represented their friendship in the Kithara cultural memory system. So that you remember, Thyros said simply.
I could never forget, Sarah replied. The next morning, Sarah and Thyros boarded the exploration vessel New Horizons, a ship designed specifically for long-range diplomatic missions. The vessel incorporated technology from 6 different species, including interstellar navigation techniques that had proven superior to human methods for certain types of space travel. As Kepler 442b fell away behind them, Sarah found herself thinking about Emma, the niece whose death had motivated her initial desperation to save Thyros. Emma would have been 12 years old now, probably fascinated by the stories of alien friends and interstellar adventures. Sarah had learned to carry her grief differently over the years, transforming it from regret into motivation for helping others when help was possible. Sarah friend, Thyros said from his specially adapted workstation, "The star charts show we will pass near the system where humanity first achieved faster than light travel. Would you like to observe it as we pass?" Sarah smiled. Even after 5 years of friendship, Thyros continued to demonstrate the curiosity and thoughtfulness that made him such an effective diplomat. "I would like that very much." The journey to the Andromedan system would take 2 years, providing ample time for Sarah and Thyros to refine their approach to potential first contact. They had learned from their own experience that successful communication between species required patience, creativity, and willingness to abandon assumptions about intelligence and consciousness. But, as the New Horizons entered hyperspace, Sarah felt confident that they were prepared for whatever they might find in the Andromedan system. The Chen doctrine had evolved from desperate improvisation into sophisticated policy, but its core principle remained unchanged. When faced with the choice between safe isolation and risky connection, choose connection. The galaxy was vast, full of diverse species and unimaginable possibilities. Each new contact offered the opportunity to expand understanding, to challenge assumptions, and to demonstrate that consciousness was precious wherever it arose. Sarah had started with the simple desire to save one dying child. Now she was part of an ongoing effort to connect minds across the universe. In the end, that transformation represented the best of what humanity could offer to galactic civilization, not advanced technology or military power, but the willingness to risk everything for compassion, to choose understanding over fear, and to believe that every intelligence deserved the chance to reach for the stars. The unexpected had happened not once, but repeatedly, as each choice to help led to new opportunities to serve. And, in a galaxy full of wonders, that pattern of choosing compassion over protocol had become humanity's greatest contribution to the community of worlds. As Sarah settled into her quarters for the long journey ahead, she touched the crystalline pendant at her throat and smiled. Somewhere behind them, a young Kithara pack leader was probably explaining stellar mechanics to fascinated cubs who would grow up knowing that the lights in the sky represented not distant mysteries, but distant friends. And, somewhere ahead of them, another species waited for the choice between isolation and connection, unaware that their decision might be influenced by a human woman who had once refused to watch a child die, and an alien friend who understood that gratitude could transform the galaxy.